Hello and welcome back to Bicyclelegs Talks Music, and doing something a little different this week. I'm actually going to be responding to another video. In particular, I'm going to be responding to a rather wonderful video on Recurrent with Todd Evans by my good friend Todd Evans, where he talked about basically different formats of music and which he thinks are the best and which the sort of pros and cons and all that sort of thing. When I watched his video, I left him a really long comment on it. And then I started thinking, you know, I really should share my own thoughts on my own channel as well. And so I thought I would do this as a response to his video. I asked Todd about it and he thought it was a good idea. So here we are doing that show right now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about what I think are the pros and cons of various formats of music. I think most of them do have both pros and cons. So, you know, what's going to be best for you may not be best for somebody else. So, you know, I have my personal favorites and that sort of thing. It doesn't necessarily mean I think they're objectively best or whatever. And I think, as I say, all of these formats do have pros and cons. There's one format we'll talk about which I don't think there's a lot of pros, but we'll get to that. I'm not going to be talking about sort of formats that just aren't a thing anymore, like 8 tracks or mini disc or anything like that, because I don't think those are particularly relevant in today's age. Sorry, Tim Derling, I know you love your 8 tracks, but you know, very few people are making or buying 8 tracks these days. So I'm going to talk about 5 different formats. I'm going to talk about vinyl, or records as we always used to call them back in the day. I'm going to talk about cassettes. I'm going to talk about CDs. I'm going to talk about downloads. And I'm going to talk about streaming. And just give my personal thoughts on these things and sort of discuss where I might agree or disagree with Todd and that sort of thing. For the most part, I have to say I agree with a lot of his takes, but I just had my own personal takes that I wanted to share with everybody. So let's start off with, and for the first 3, the physical formats, I've actually got an album where I have all 3 different physical formats. So that's what I'm going to sort of show as my show and tell for this episode. And the album in particular that we're going to be looking at is Hippopotamus by Sparks. I've done a Sparks studio albums ranked top 10 with Larry Graves, aka Canadian Stud Muffin. I'll leave a link to that in the description so you can check that out. But this is the only album of theirs I have in all 3 formats. So first of all, of course, there is vinyl. This is my personal favorite, and that is purely for nostalgia reasons. I am not one of these people who is a music snob and thinks that, oh, vinyl's the only way to listen. You've got to listen to it analog and all this sort of thing. No, I don't think it necessarily follows at all. Todd, he broke my heart. I'm sorry to say this, Todd. He mentioned in his show that if you're new to collecting music, he doesn't think you should go down the vinyl route. That absolutely broke my heart because I adore collecting vinyl. But you know what? He has a point. Vinyl is very expensive to get into. You know, vinyl records, and I'm talking Australian dollars here, it's probably cheaper in the US and Europe and that sort of thing. But to buy new vinyl albums here, you're looking at $60, $70, $80, sometimes even more. Now, if you use a calculator to calculate rate of inflation and all that sort of thing, then that's about the price they would have been back in the day, back in the sort of 80s and that sort of thing. You know, they've just gone up by the rate of inflation, but other formats haven't. And so in the long run, vinyl is still like the most expensive format to buy. that's definitely a con. It's also, if you don't have a good record player and a good stereo, you're not going to get the most out of your vinyl. And that's a definite con too. The pros for me are purely nostalgia, I think. I love collecting vinyl, and I particularly, as you will have seen when I do my What's in Bicycle Legs bag shows and things like that, I love vintage vinyl. I love the hunt of going to a record store or a garage sale or that sort of thing, and just crate digging, going through, having no preconceived idea of what I'm looking for, and just finding certain things. Recently I got some great records at the Lifeline Book Fest. Lifeline is a wonderful charity here that has a crisis call line, and every year or so they do the Book Fest, where they sell like a ton of books and CDs and records and all this sort of thing. And it was just great to go through there and dig through the crates and actually find some things that I wasn't expecting. What are the other pros of vinyl? For me, I love the fact that it's big. I love the fact that you get, you know, the artwork like that, and you can get the gatefold sleeve, you know, and you get the inserts with the lyrics on it, and I find the lyrics are easier to read on these than they are on a CD. So, and this is one thing too. Notice here, this happened in the 2010s a lot, but it doesn't happen now, and I think it should, is that if you bought an album new, you would get a download code so that you could have a digital copy of it as well. And I think that's a great idea, and I don't know why they've stopped doing that with vinyl, but I really loved that you could get a free download when you bought an album on vinyl, so that you could have a digital copy to play on your iPod or your phone or whatever, and have a digital copy as well as the vinyl. So it's a shame they don't do that anymore. I love the sound of vinyl. I love secondhand records that have a little bit of surface noise. There's something warm and inviting about those little pops and crackles. And I know that a lot of people, that's a deal breaker. You know, they don't want the surface noise and that sort of thing. But especially on some of those 60s records and that sort of thing, to me, they just give some atmosphere to the music. And I love that about it. So, vinyl, my personal favorite, but I do understand it is rather impractical for a lot of people. I get that. Next one we'll talk about is cassettes. Now, in the 80s, I used to have a lot of cassettes. A lot of them with ones that I would record myself. I would record my vinyl albums onto cassette. We would get a C90 cassette, and generally speaking, you could fit a single album on one side of a C90 because you get 45 minutes each side. And in the 80s, that was how you had portable music. You would have your Walkman, and you would like have your cassettes, either your pre-recorded cassettes like this one, or you would have ones that you recorded yourself. And you know, you could take that music with you. And you know, I remember going on various camps and that sort of thing because I was in the Scouts, and I'd also go to music camp because I was a nerd. And I would take, you know, sort of 8-10 cassettes with me and have my Walkman, and when I had my spare time in the cabin and that sort of thing, listen to music on my sort of crappy little headphones and all that sort of thing. One thing I'm going to disagree with Todd on here, and I don't necessarily apologize for this one, but maybe I just never had the equipment that Todd had, but he said that, you know, cassettes can sound just as good as any other format. I never found that. I never ever found that. And I had a decent cassette deck in my room when I was a teenager. I mean, obviously Walkman, you know, they were never great quality sound, especially with those sort of crappy little headphones. that you got with the Walkman, generally speaking. So I don't know about the sound quality thing. I'm yet to be convinced. If somebody invited me over with a really, really great sound system, put a cassette on and it played beautifully and sounded just as good. He was using the Closer Continuation album by Porcupine Tree, which I actually do have that one on cassette as well. But I actually don't have a cassette player at the moment, so I don't own a lot of cassettes. In fact, I think I own 4 grand total. But yeah, I've never found that sound-wise they kind of stood up. The big pro was, and it really doesn't apply now obviously, it was the fact that your music could be portable with cassettes. Obviously now you've got streaming and all that sort of thing, so you really don't need cassettes for that anymore. And you know, it's a bit cumbersome to be carrying a bunch of cassettes around and all that sort of thing. But back in the day, it was that or nothing, or the radio, you know, that was it as far as portable music was concerned. And obviously you had no control over what you listened to on the radio, other than which station you were going to listen to. But, and the other thing I never liked about cassettes is they're fragile. You know, the number of times I had cassettes break, you know, the tape would actually break, or they would get chewed up by the cassette player because you hadn't cleaned the heads in a while, or like something had just gone wrong. Like if your tape gets chewed up, that's the end of it. You got to chuck it out, buy a new one. If the tape breaks, you can fix them. But I got very good at doing surgery on cassette tapes back in the day, you know, with my little screwdriver and a bit of sticky tape to stick the tape back together where it had broken and all this sort of thing. But it was pesky, and I never liked that about cassettes. But, you know, as I say, back in the day, if you wanted portable music, that was pretty much your only option, and I did like it for that. So that's my big pro with cassettes, even though it's kind of an obsolete pro at this stage. Obviously the next format to look at is compact discs or CDs. Now when CDs first came out, they were very expensive. You know, CDs in the 80s, when they first came out, I don't know what it was like in Europe and the US and places like that, but here, CDs in the 80s cost more in actual dollar terms. I'm not talking about adjusted for inflation, I'm talking in like actual dollar form, than they do now. They were sort of like $27, $28, whereas they're about $20 now, for new CDs I'm talking about. CDs, obviously less fragile than either cassettes or records. They have a good sound quality. I love the sound quality of CDs. But, you know, people ask me, what sounds better, records or CDs? And that really, really depends. It depends on your equipment. It depends on the mastering, because music needs to be mastered differently for different formats. And if it's not mastered specific to record or CD or whatever, it's going to sound crap on whatever format it wasn't mastered for. So that's an important thing to kind of think about too. CDs are convenient, but I mean, the drawback with CDs, I think, apart from anything else, is, and this is something, again, it may not bother you, and that's fine too, and it doesn't really bother me. I'm not really sort of thinking in terms of this, but resale value. Vinyl has value in the marketplace. CDs, with certain notable exceptions that are collectible and that sort of thing, really don't. You know, CDs, again, I'm talking from my own experience here in Australia. I can't talk about other countries so much. But you know, if you want to sell your CDs, it's hard. You know, a lot of them you can't give away. You go into like a charity shop, or what we call an op shop here, and they'll have tons of CDs that they'll be selling for $1 or $2 each, and they can't get rid of them. Some op shops have even stopped accepting CDs and stopped selling them because they just take up space and nobody buys them. That, however, becomes a big pro for people who want to get into collecting physical media because it's cheaper. It's a lot cheaper than vinyl. Even for the new stuff. You know, you're looking at $20, $25 for a new CD versus $60, $70, $80 for the same album on vinyl. So there's that. But yeah, it's a big con if you care about the value of your music collection. CDs just don't generally hold their value. I mean, that may change. There was a time sort of 20 years ago when you couldn't give vinyl away. And now things have changed. You know, vinyl became big again. It became collectible again. Will that happen with CDs? There's a lot of videos out there that'll tell you that yes, it will, or no, it won't. I have no idea. My suspicion is maybe not, but we'll see. I don't think it matters to me, but if it matters to you, then that's important to know. The other thing about CDs is, you know, they're smaller, so the artwork isn't as big. You get the booklet, you know, the lyrics are in there, and it's much harder, you know, for us old farts. You know, it's harder to read. It's not so bad for me now that I have multifocal lenses, but I still prefer the bigger booklets and inserts that you get on the vinyl. You get bigger pictures, you get bigger lyrics and all that sort of thing. So something to think about there as well. But I think CDs, they're cheaper to collect, especially if you want to get into some older music. You can go hunting around sort of charity shops and garage sales and things like that, and you'll pick up, you know, great albums, classic albums for next to nothing. Absolutely wonderful way to start a music collection. So if you're on a budget, you know, CDs is the way to go, for sure. But, you know, to each their own. You know, everybody's going to have different priorities, and that's why I'm trying to give the pros and cons of various things so that you can make up your own mind about what you want to collect. Me personally, as you can see, I collect CDs quite a lot as well as vinyl. You know, in my shows, I'm always holding up records. But if you look in the background here, you're seeing a bunch of CDs. So obviously I like to collect both. I, you know, don't really collect cassettes. As I say, I've only got 4 of them. But, you know, there's definitely no problem in having both if that's what you want to. So now there's a couple of other formats that we can talk about, and they're not physical formats, they're digital formats. The first one is downloads. Now downloads, like I'm talking about legal, paid for downloads, I feel like there's not a lot of pro to that. It's great to have your music physical, you know, it's great to have your music on a hard drive or whatever. But if you're going to pay money for music, me personally, I'd rather get the CD or the vinyl and have something tangible. You know, one of the big cons with downloads is technical errors. Like if you fry a hard drive and you can't recover the data on that hard drive, that music is lost. And oftentimes you can't download it again without paying for it again. So that's a big drawback. Downloads, I think, were a lot more of a good idea when iPods were a thing. And if you're still somebody who has one of those old iPod classics and, you know, wants to stock it up with music, then, you know, downloads might be good. But you can just as easily rip the music from a CD and put it on your iPod as well. So that's another thing to think about. Download's a little bit cheaper than a CD, but again, you know, just to have something physical and tangible, I think is a good thing. Because again, it can't accidentally be erased or that sort of thing. But downloads, you know, it depends on the quality of the download too, to decide, you know, how does it sound, you know, what's the, you know, if it's a 128 kbps MP3, it's maybe not going to sound as good as if it's a WAV or a FLAC file, you know, with the compressed versus uncompressed and all that sort of thing, lossless versus lossy. So that's something to think about with downloads as well. I don't think downloads are used that much anymore. I think the best thing for downloads, and this is the big pro for downloads, is that you can support independent artists on a site like Bandcamp. And that's a point that I hadn't thought about, that Todd brought up in his video. So, you know, definitely check out Todd's video. And yeah, I think that's the big pro, is that you can support independent artists, put a little bit of money in their pocket, because it's really hard for them otherwise. And the last format that we'll talk about is streaming. Now, streaming is one that really divides people, and it definitely has some big pros and some big cons. To me, the big pro with streaming, apart from the fact that it's just music on the go and you can listen to it wherever you are as long as you've got a pair of headphones, is it's great for sampling stuff. If you want to check out an artist for the first time, you want to listen to an album and see if it's worth investing in a physical format of it, go and stream it, go and listen to it. You know, when I was doing my Bicyclelegs Discovered Rush series, streaming was invaluable to me because I didn't own those albums, at least not to begin with. And the only way I could listen to them was on streaming. And so it was through streaming these albums and listening to them and studying them and taking my notes to do those shows that I became a Rush fan. So in that sense, streaming was absolutely invaluable. And I've discovered some great music through streaming, you know, hear something for the first time and go and stream the whole album. And, you know, sometimes I'll get 2 or 3 songs into an album streaming it and I'll be like on my phone buying a copy of the album because I really, really enjoyed it. Beardfish from last year, that was one album in particular. I was like 10 minutes into that album and I was online finding a copy. So, but I first heard it through streaming service. So that's the big pro, you know, is being able to sample music and check things out for the first time. As I say, the other big pro is just being able to have portable music you can listen to on the bus or the train or the plane or wherever you are. You know, as long as you've got connection to the internet. And even then, with some of the streaming services, you can download stuff onto your phone and listen to it offline as well. So that's great too. There are big cons with streaming though, too. And, you know, the biggest con is the sound quality just isn't as good. It is compressed, it is lossy, unless you've got like some special thing. I think Apple you can get lossless, but I think you have to pay extra for that. And, you know, the other big con with streaming is that artists or record companies or whoever, if they decide that they want to pull their albums from streaming services, they can do that. And you can't listen to those albums anymore if streaming is your only source of listening to that music. You know, if you buy a physical format, if you buy the record, or you buy the CD, or even the cassette, you can listen to that album for as long as you don't sort of damage it to the point where it's not listenable anymore. But you'll always have that music as long as you look after it. With streaming, you don't have that guarantee Music can be pulled for whatever reason from those streaming services and you can't access that music anymore. The other point that I will bring up that I think is a con, and that is that artists really don't get paid very much from streaming. Now, I do agree with Todd that that is not your problem. If you don't have the money to go out and buy physical formats, don't let that stop you from streaming by any stretch. But I do really wish that streaming would compensate artists more fairly. And that's partly the streaming service's fault, and it's partly the record company's fault, because like record company contracts with artists often mean that they get a lot less from streaming than they do get from physical sales. As I say, I agree with Todd 100%. That is not your problem. But it's still something that I think is worth mentioning, and it is worth, hopefully we can do something about it to get these artists more money. So there you have it, everyone. Those are my thoughts about various physical formats. As I say, thank you so much to Todd Evans from Recurrent with Todd Evans for making his video on formats in the first place that made me want to respond and give my own thoughts about various music formats. If you are not already subscribed to Recurrent with Todd Evans, please go and correct that immediately. I will leave a link in the description, of course. Todd has done so many wonderful shows on so many different channels. He's an absolutely fabulous part of our community here on YouTube, and I think it's absolutely marvelous that he started his own channel now and is doing his own thing and coming up with ideas like this, which I hadn't thought of. So thank you, Todd, for making your video, and thank you for giving your blessing to me making a response to it. Please do like, share and subscribe. It really does help the channel out. If you're new to the channel, please go and have a look at some of my other videos. I have everything playlisted, so if you want to look at some of my studio albums ranked shows, I have a playlist for those. If you want to see some of my favorite albums of all time shows, I have a playlist for those. And if you want to see my appearances on other people's channels, and I'm hopefully going to have an upcoming appearance on Recurrent with Todd Evans, I also have a playlist for those. If you want to follow me on social media, I'm at bicyclelegs on Instagram, Twitter, and a bunch of other places. I also have a dedicated bicyclelegs Facebook page. Links are all in the doobly-doo. Please do give those all a follow and join in the conversation. I'd really love to have you there. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.